Warm welcome to our Bayer LinkedIn Live Let's Talk About Parkinson's Disease. My name is Eva Brettschneider, and I'm leading the Patient Partnerships and Stakeholder Engagement Group at Bayer. At Bayer, we really partner with patients and caregivers to make sure their voices are heard alongside the innovation lifecycle in all our processes and activities. And today, we want to listen again and learn more about a life with Parkinson's disease. Parkinson's disease. It is the most common neurodegenerative movement disorder. It is impacting more than 10 million people worldwide. It is caused by nerve cell damage in the brain, leading to decreased levels of dopamine. This is a neurotransmitter involved in processes such as memory or movement, and therefore really important. In most people, symptoms appear at the age of 60 or over and worsen with time, heavily impacting quality of life. This disease touches the lives of so many people, patients, their caregivers, the advocates who fight for their rights and needs, and researchers and healthcare providers who strive for the best delivery of care to their patients. It is with great pleasure to introduce our speakers who represent these different groups. Dr. Daniela Berg, who is a neurologist and esteemed Parkinson's expert. She's the director of the Clinic for Neurology at Schleswig-Holstein University Hospital and professor at the Medical Faculty of Christian Albrechts University in Kiel, Germany. Then there is Eli Pollard. She's a long-standing patient advocate for people living with Parkinson's disease and executive director of the World Parkinson's Coalition based in New York in the US. Also in the US, there's David Schaaf. He's the Associate Director, Talent Acquisition, but also he's living with Parkinson's disease. And of course, I'd also like to warmly welcome you in the audience. And please participate in this session. You can submit your questions at any time using the chat function on that live stream. And we will have a Q&A a little bit later. So please let us know what you're most interested to learn more about. And with this, I'd like to start with David, if I may. Can you share with us what life with Parkinson's is like for you?
Sure. I'm not sure how I can phrase it appropriately, but I was diagnosed about 6 years ago. I started showing symptoms probably 2 years prior to that. So the diagnosis was a shock, but it wasn't exactly a complete surprise because I'd been having a couple of things that were kind of pointing out to me that something was wrong. And I was not diagnosed immediately. It took about 2 years for a diagnosis to come through, and it's a tricky thing to do because it shows itself in many different ways to many different people. I refer to it as a snowflake disease. Anybody that gets Parkinson's has it very uniquely. Not everybody gets it the same way. Now, in terms of living with it, I'd say on the upside, believe it or not, there is an upside. It has taught me, and this may sound a little bit corny, to just treasure every day, because I don't know how I'm going to feel from day to day. But for the most part, I've been feeling pretty good. I'm still able to work. I've been working full time in my job since I've been diagnosed with this. I want to keep on working, quite frankly, because I think it's good for me to try to do that. But I also know the reality, so I don't know how fast this is going to go, but so far so good. I am progressing very slowly. And this is one thing that you really want when you have a condition like this. You don't want progress. The only positive progress would be to have a cure or something, But the progress that I'm experiencing has been very slow. And I think it might be important for people to know that I have the stiff variety, which means that I experience a lot of stiffness with my condition. So exercise is very important. Of course, I'm on, certain medications that help with this as well. But I think the whole thing is I try to concentrate on other things, which is why work is good. And I don't want to get obsessed with thinking about what this thing could do. And I think that's what's really important to keep in mind. So did I answer your question?
Yeah, thank you so much. And
Okay.
It's very inspiring already to learn how you really live with the disease and treasure every day. So Daniela, from your experience as a physician, what does the patient journey normally look like? Is it very similar to David, or as he said, it really is different to each patient? So maybe you can share a bit how this patient journey normally looks like.
Yes, great question. And I have to say, completely agree with David. There is no normally. I've had the privilege for 25 years now to work with individuals living with Parkinson's disease. And I really would like to say living with Parkinson's disease and not Parkinson's disease patients, because Parkinson's disease patients kind of means, or well, it gives you the feeling that you're a patient every day of your life. But in fact, I think somebody living with a disease, and it's a disease with which it can be lived, no question. I mean, David is an excellent example for that. You don't want to feel as a patient every day. You are the boss in your life. You say what a day will be like. And of course, you have this accompanying partner, I would like to say, this PD being with you, but it's not your life. So I think this is very, very important, and there is no normal. So I think it's important for everybody to understand that Parkinson's disease affects the whole nervous system, the brain, the peripheral nervous system, and also the autonomous nervous system, which means that symptoms are extremely heterogeneous. We have the motor symptoms, the slowness, what we call the bradykinesia, the rigidity, which is stiffness, and the shaking, the tremor. So these three main symptoms can occur, but do not occur to the same degree in everybody, and not even at the same time or order. So this is all different. These are only the motor symptoms. Because the whole nervous system is affected in Parkinson's disease, we have many, many other symptoms, like, for example, constipation, urinary problems, depression, cognitive dysfunction, olfactory dysfunction, many, many others. This is nothing to shock individuals living with Parkinson's disease. It's rather to make people understand that this is a disorder which affects everything, or can affect everything. But on the other hand, it's something where we can really say, I have a specific, or the person affected has a specific patient journey, and you need to address these symptoms specifically. So for us as medical doctors, it means we really have to listen. We have to listen to our patients, we have to listen to the caregivers, and we have to see where's really the problem. And then there are some individuals who have a bit of therapy for their motor symptoms, but on whom we really have to concentrate on the constipation, because this is the major problem for them, or their depression, or their cognitive dysfunction. So I think regarding therapy, there are three main pillars, and David has already alluded to that. One, of course, is medication, and this is something we have the advantage to really give some advice to the individuals we accompany in their disease. But then there's activity, and this is also something David already mentioned. So activity, physical activity, mental activity is extremely important, because it keeps our brain working. It helps plasticity of the brain. It helps also the body to stay moving. So this is important. It's physiotherapy, it's occupational therapy, it's speech therapy, but it's also activity you do on your own. This is very, very important. And the third pillar, which is probably the most important one, is the pillar of what you are doing yourself in your life, what gives you your self-esteem, what gives you joy in life, fun in everyday activities. So this is something I think everybody should try to concentrate on, in spite of living with Parkinson's disease.
Thank you so much. And Eli, from your perspective, so how do patients actually find a way to an organization like yours? And really, does that mirror what you hear, their needs that are expressed there, and also the priorities?
Yeah, thank you so much, Ava. What a great question. And following, of course, David and Dr. Berg, this is wonderful. They've set it up very well for me. So I think one of the things that makes Parkinson's unique as a disease is like David said, for many people, it does progress slowly, which allows people with Parkinson's time to process what they're experiencing, what they're going through, and then allows them to find their local organization, or an organization like ours, the World Parkinson Coalition, and engage. There are other neurological diseases that are very quickly progressing, like an ALS, that they might not have the time to become big patient advocates. Whereas in the Parkinson's space, people with Parkinson's have time to, like David said, deal with the shock and the fear of a diagnosis, process it, learn about their disease, and then ideally find the organization that's local to them. I think the World Parkinson Coalition, we work with more than 100 organizations around the world. So there's every country, just about every country, has at least one Parkinson's organization that's national, or some countries are fortunate enough to have more than one organization. And so I find a lot of people, it takes some time. Everyone is on a different Parkinson's journey, and some people are diagnosed and they immediately look for a patient advocacy organization in their country to get engaged. And some people, it takes a few years before they're ready to even pick up that phone and have that conversation. But I think what's really, for me, it's been really eye-opening and really fun to see over the last 15 years or 17 years since I've been working for the World Parkinson Coalition is there's been huge progress. We had the first World Parkinson Congress in 2006, and at that time, people with Parkinson's were not included in scientific meetings and meetings with scientists and researchers and clinicians. Our Congress in 2006, which was not that long ago, was the first time people with Parkinson's and care partners were invited into a scientific meeting with renowned professors like Professor Berg and other neuroscientists, because we felt like people with Parkinson's need to be part of the solution when it comes to finding answers and cure, and eventually a cure for Parkinson's. We need to be listening more to people with Parkinson's and their care partners. And so, I think people, how they find their local organization, usually it's by word of mouth. You might meet your own doctor might say, I suggest you contact a local organization. Nowadays with social media, there's so much access to organizations through social media. And I think the one gift of Parkinson's is that it is a slower progressing disease, and it gives people time to process what they're experiencing and to find a way to engage. And there are so many wonderful ways to engage with local groups and international groups. But there's been a lot of progress. So for people who wonder, where is the progress? What are we doing? The reality is we've made incredible progress. Now people with Parkinson's are included in conversations around research. What are research priorities? What are we going to prioritize if we can only focus on one thing? What should we make that one thing? And so there have been a lot of incredible steps over the last 17 years, and I think we're just on this great upward trajectory with patient engagement, and it's exciting to see where it's going.
And on that note, as so many things are happening now, maybe Daniela, you can help to advise where can patients and care partners really find that information to really have the information also about clinical trials, but also beyond. What are the treatment options? What is the medical progress made? Is there any advice for people really on how to get the information they need?
Well, actually, I've learned that we have here a worldwide meeting currently. So I think this is really depending on the countries you are in. For us in Germany, in Europe, we of course have patient organizations who are very well informed where you can get information. Then even here in Germany, we have the information platforms of the Michael J. Fox Foundation, which are very active all over the world. And there's the Fox Trial Finder, and the Fox Trial Finder is a very interesting instrument where you can see which studies are going on at what part of the world and whether you can participate, for example. But there are also these large organizations which are not primarily bound to a country, but which are overarching. And I think, Eli, this is what you're talking about. So there are different ways to get informed. Of course, if you are really interested in trials, if you are interested in science, and if you have the possibility to get to a university hospital, it's always good to talk to scientists there. In general, they are very open. Because we all as medical doctors know that science only works when we work together as scientists, together with those who have the disease. And so I myself and many of the others are now happy to talk to patients, to talk to caregivers. And to be honest, the most important daily life research question I've been working on, not the cellular ones, but the life involving research questions I've learned from my patients, definitely.
Thank you. And David, from your experience, so how do you inform yourself? And do you have any advice for people who seeking information? What worked for you?
Well, I mean, full disclosure, when I first got diagnosed, I, of course, didn't want to accept it. So I did what every coward does. I ran to 3 other doctors to see if I could find one that would tell me that I don't have it. That didn't work. I even flew myself out to the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota, and I live in Philadelphia, the Philadelphia area. Nevertheless, when I finally started to accept the fact that I have it, I have a terrific doctor, part of Penn Medicine's movement disorders clinic. And the first thing she did was she kind of, I don't like to use the word force, but she made it a point to get me over to see an occupational therapist, a physical therapist, a speech language therapist. And it's all part of the clinic that I go to in Philadelphia. So all of a sudden you kind of get into a situation like that, and you find that there's people like you, and you try to find the people like you that have the better attitudes, if you will. And it's a hard thing to have a good attitude about, to be honest with you. So I'm not trying to single anybody out, but you need some other positive influences around you. And as Dr. Berg was saying, it's not a death sentence. It's something that you can live with. It's something that you can try to help yourself with the medications, of course, but also with various types of exercise. As for myself, I try to do walking every day. I do a little bit of Tai Chi, which is supposedly very good for it. At the very least, it calms the mind, which is a good thing. So little by little, as I started to kind of infiltrate through Penn Medicine, which is where I'm treated and where I work actually, I started to branch out and meet local organizations. I started to meet people just through word of mouth. There's a situation where the various hospitals that have movement disorders clinics and are specialists in this particular condition, they have a buddy type program, where I have actually talked to people who have it and try to get their spirits up, so to speak, and they try to get mine up, so to speak. And it's a really, again, this is going to sound corny, but it's a really nice group of people, very interesting people. And as I've been reminded, and I think Dr. Berg would agree with this, if you have to get a neurological disease, this is the one to get, which sounds odd, but it does seem to be the one that's most treatable. And as Eli had pointed out, it is the one that seems to have the longest shelf life, in terms of progress and what have you. They do a heck of a lot more for it than they used to be able to. I know I have a cousin who has this, and he got diagnosed about 20 years ago. Very different trajectory, from the beginning with him. And there's lots of reasons for that, but I have to think that part of it's because of all the research and the different medications and the fact that they've discovered that exercise is actually very good for this. There's just ways of elongating the condition, if you will.
And Eli, speaking of the community and their needs and also the gaps they may see, is there anything you want to share that are maybe not yet highlighted, but really important to the community where it can improve?
Well, I think it's important. I mean, and David has touched on this. He's already, and I don't know, David, if you call yourself, when you describe yourself, a Parkinson advocate, but you are an advocate just by the nature of what you're doing, right? And I know that in the United States, we use the term advocate, meaning somebody who really engages and is a kind of an activist in a way for their disease. I know the word advocate is used differently in Europe. In Germany, it's more of a lawyer, perhaps. But the idea is that a Parkinson's advocate is someone who engages. And it used to be, what I think it's important is, when I started years ago, when people talked about being an advocate, it was you either signed up for a clinical trial, that was how you could be an advocate, or you were raising money for someone to do research. Those were the only two options for engaging. That has completely changed. I mean, you just use an example, David. You're a buddy, like a mentor, or maybe a buddy of someone. That is advocacy. You're discussing Parkinson's with another person. They might be a newly diagnosed person. You might be helping pull them along their journey. So I think my message to the community is that advocacy looks different for everyone, and there are many ways to engage. You can engage in clinical trials, which is a beautiful gift to give to a future generation, and I encourage people to consider that. You can engage by raising money for researchers, two very standard ways to do it, but you can also engage by meeting with scientists and talking to researchers about priorities around Parkinson's. What is it like to have Parkinson's? What would you like to see them focus on? You can engage by working with clinicians. You can engage by educating other patients, by writing a blog, by hosting an educational event, by teaching new, I mean, there are so many ways to engage. And I want people to understand there is a path for you. Just figure out what brings you joy, what makes you happy, something that you enjoy doing, and engage that way. You are an advocate if you're engaging. And I think it's important because sometimes people think, oh, I can only be a Parkinson's advocate if I'm very active and giving talks at lectures. That's not true. Advocacy is engaging with your disease and helping to educate and participate in the disease that you live with. And the reality is, if you live with Parkinson's, you know what it's like, because you live with it 24 hours, 7 days a week. You know what it's like to go to bed with it at night. You know what it's like to wake up with it in the morning. You are an excellent person to be an advocate. So I encourage people to really put that hat on, and be engaged, or to be an advocate in whatever way you can in your country or your region of the world. And there's a place for you. And I invite everyone to get involved.
I already sneaked into the questions, and there are many questions around the disease, how to recognize the disease. And also, David, you spoke about early symptoms and a bit of a journey until you got diagnosed. So maybe you can share, or Daniela maybe first, share a few of even there is no new normal with Parkinson's, but maybe sharing some of the symptoms that are most common, and also how this is progressing mainly for most of the people.
Yes, sure. So I think David is completely right that it usually takes really some time to diagnose Parkinson's disease. And I think this is because we as doctors are sometimes just not aware of what we are seeing. It's not so much the movement disorder specialists, because we are used to that, but of course those who do not see PD patients every day, and we as movement disorder specialists of course have to modestly say we do not see other things. So it's not to blame those who don't see it, it's just that you really have to have the experience. Movement disorders need to be seen to really understand them. You can't only read about it. So regarding the motor symptoms, if it's not tremor, if it's not shaking, it's sometimes really difficult, because it's only a bit of slowness in dragging, for example, one leg when walking, of not swinging one arm properly when walking, of not turning quickly when you have to turn. Yeah. That the handwriting gets a bit smaller. These are the first motor symptoms. If it's not tremor, tremor is much easier because you just see it, you realize it. It's the resting tremor. When you're sitting, doing nothing, then all of a sudden your hand starts shaking. But this is actually taking place when more than 50% of the motor of some neurons, especially the dopaminergic neurons in the brain, have already degenerated. And Parkinson's disease starts much, much earlier. In fact, it starts probably a decade or even longer before that. And before the dopaminergic neurons in the brain are affected, usually other parts of the nervous system are affected. And in fact, you can realize symptoms of these parts of the nervous system. For example, constipation may occur a decade before motor symptoms occur, hyposmia. And one symptom or syndrome which very frequently in the long run leads to the diagnosis of Parkinson's disease is REM sleep behavior disorder. This is a parasomnia when individuals who sleep have their normal dreams, but normally when a healthy person sleeps and dreams, this person is just laying flat in the bed and can't move because the muscle tone is not there. So they are really just laying in their bed, nothing, they're not able to move anything. But if you have REM sleep behavior disorder, there is a tone in the muscles. So people can move and they can act out their dreams. And it can be very vivid. Usually these individuals have nightmares and then they really act heavily. They can harm themselves. They can harm their bed partners. So this is REM sleep behavior disorder. And individuals with REM sleep behavior disorder, at least when they're older than 50 years of age, they have a very high likelihood, 80% of them will get Parkinson's disease or similar disorder within the next 10 to 12 years. So these are symptoms which are already part of the disease, but which are not motor Parkinson's. And this is what we as medical doctors, as neurologists, need to listen to. We need to ask for that, because individuals who come to us generally do not tell us all these things, except they have heard about it or read about it somewhere. But if this is not the case, we need to consider that, we need to think, and then we have kind of a puzzle. We say, oh, there's a person who has constipation, who has REM sleep behavior disorder, and now he's starting to move slowly. There is no other possibility. It's most likely Parkinson's disease.
And are there any environmental factors or other influencing factors that play a role in developing Parkinson's disease?
Yeah, so I don't want to talk too much, but just to finish up this story of early diagnosis and what influences the early diagnosis. Parkinson's disease is a multi-causal disease, one needs to say. There are some genetic forms, purely genetic forms. So you can really, very few individuals can inherit it within their family. It's still a question of the environment and of exercise and of nutrition and so on when you get the symptoms, at what age of onset plays a role, but it's still genetic. But in almost all of the others, and it's the vast majority, 90%, it's multifactorial. And this means that we do have a genetic predisposition. So we have some genes which protect and some genes who increase the risk. And if the balance is not good, if it's more the risk genes we have, then we are more likely. And the more we have in our, we call it risk score, the more likely we are that to get Parkinson's disease, especially when we have environmental influences which kind of interact with our genetic predisposition. So, for example, we cannot detoxify some aspects of the environment, some toxic aspects we all encounter. Some can handle it very easily, so it's not a problem if they encounter whatever toxic aspect is in their environment or in their nutrition, and some others can't. So this is what we call multifactorial. And if these individuals then hardly move, eat the wrong things, then of course they are more likely to get Parkinson's disease.
And just to follow up, oh, David, sorry, I don't want to cut you off. Please go ahead.
No, that's okay. I was just going to say Dr. Berg's making a very good point. I think there's as much environmental factor, if not more, than the genetic component. Now, in my family, I mentioned that I have a first cousin who has this. Coincidentally, we both grew up in a part of the city of Philadelphia that's very near a chemical plant. So, you know, maybe it's a little far-fetched, but I do believe that a lot of diseases that are recognized today are directly a result of how we've treated the planet in some ways, you know, and unfortunately, it's like Danielle is saying, we just don't have certain protectants, if you will, you know, so, you know, and intriguingly, my family, there's multiple sclerosis in my family. When I first suspected that I had something, I thought I was coming down with MS. I went to a neurologist. He didn't see anything. He was looking for Parkinson's, but didn't see it. That was a year prior to my getting a diagnosis. But to the point that was made, it was a movement disorders person. And the tip off for me was my handwriting got very small. It was the strangest thing, you know, and I had stiffness in my legs. And those were the two things that really had me wondering if something was up.
And maybe just as a follow-up, because some people on the line asking if there is any influence by caffeine or nicotine consumption associated to Parkinson's. You spoke about the wrong things.
Yeah, I have to admit these are the right things. We do not like to advocate smoking, but in fact, it's the one habit which kind of protects most, one has to say. So at least there are most of, there's no other lifestyle factor which has been investigated as much as smoking, and all studies show that smoking is protective, which does not really mean that smoking itself is not a problem. I mean, we have lots of other problems with smoking, but because of several aspects of smoking, one is that it inhibits a specific enzyme, which is the MAO-B, and the MAO-B is in fact an enzyme which is also inhibited by medication we give in Parkinson's disease. So in fact, once you're smoking, you help your body to not degenerate degenerate dopamine. So you have more dopamine in your brain. So this is one way of acting of smoking. But having said that, there's no reason to smoke. There are lots of other things you can do, so please. But another aspect is caffeine, yeah. So we haven't talked a lot about nutrition. I'm curious to hear what you, Eli, are recommending the individuals you are talking to. But what we know from scientific approaches is that caffeine, green tea, berries, red berries are very helpful. So these are all nutrients which entail polyphenols. We call those polyphenols. And these are very little elements which kind of catch toxic elements from the nutrients we have, so like free radical species. What we recommend, and there are also some studies on that regarding the very early phases, but also Parkinson's disease in later stages, is more of a Mediterranean diet. So rather fish than meat, lots of fruit, lots of vitamins from fruit and vegetables, not out of pills, but really from what you can get from our earth. So this is helpful. And of course, lots to drink. Water, of course, is helpful. Tea, coffee, I've mentioned. Not that much Coca-Cola, lemonade, and all this sugary stuff. So I think this is what generally is a healthy diet. It's also very helpful for Parkinson's disease, for the brain, also with other kinds of diseases, for example, Alzheimer's disease. It's a very similar diet. But maybe, Eli, you can say what you are recommending, because this is such a topic which is always discussed.
Well, absolutely one of the hottest topics. And everything you said, I agree with. So I think it is the Mediterranean diet, less sugar, less dairy, more Mediterranean, focused on fresh vegetables and foods. And I think this also falls under the topic that you spoke about, Dr. Burr, or David, I think also spoke about self-care. The reality is, if you see your doctor maybe once or twice a year, you're seeing your doctor. This is something that one of our patient advocates in the field, Sarah Rigger from Sweden, has outlined this in some of her previous work. And she has Parkinson's, and she has always said, I see my doctor twice a year for 30 minutes at a time. So it's 1 hour out of a year I see my doctor. And she said, the other 8,765 hours, I have to take care of myself. So I have to make sure that I'm eating the right food. I have to make sure I'm exercising, because no one's going to do it for me. I have to choose the right food. I have to choose the right exercise, the right social community to keep me feeling well, physically, mentally, and spiritually. And so it falls under the self-care. Nutrition is part of that umbrella of what choices are you making when you're in your 8,765 hours of the year where you're taking care of yourself. And it doesn't mean you need to see your doctor more. It just means you and your doctor have to have good communication about what you're doing when you're taking care of yourself and how it's working for you. So you're a team.
And David, from your personal perspective, if you could address like just one of the symptoms, which one would it be for you?
Oh my goodness, address one of them in particular. I have as I said, the biggest thing for me is I get stiff, and there are mornings when I literally just have to really be very patient with myself to get up. I do find though that if I force myself to exercise, it does wonders, so even if I just do like just jumping jacks or something ridiculous, and they're painful, because there is some pain that comes with this condition, I believe. But once I shake it out, so to speak, it's I feel much better. And then I was taught very early on to do something called the LSVT exercises. They're the big exercises, and they're very helpful, and I have to concur with everybody with what they're saying about nutrition. If I eat badly, which is not too often, I feel it, so I definitely have to pay attention when I'm eating, way more than I ever used to, which I think just comes with age anyway. Dairy is an enemy of mine. I cannot do ice cream, for example. Now the interesting thing about it is it was never particularly good for me back in the day. Now it's like it's taboo. So it's interesting.
Thank you. And there's so many questions around at which age should someone really seek screening? And also, is this a genetic disorder? So if it lies with the family, shall I get help earlier? Is there any general advice you can give, Daniela?
Well, in fact, although I'm a medical doctor, I keep telling my patients, go and see a doctor only when you really need it. I mean, there are so many things that can happen to you in your life, and you can't go because something can happen to you to a doctor for every condition. I think if you realize that something is wrong, you should go and see the doctor. And I hope for you that the doctor is listening and that it's really taking care of you then. So this is my first recommendation. It's my really personal one. Of course, there are some screening things like, for example, breast cancer and colon and so on. This is something else, but talking now about neurological diseases in general. This holds true, especially for those who do not have Parkinson's disease in the family. When you have Parkinson's disease in your family and when you are anxious that you may get it yourself, and you realize some symptoms that you're not really sure, is it a symptom or it's rather my anxiousness that thinks that I have a symptom, then it may also be good to see a doctor to be sure that there's nothing to be worried about. So these are different conditions, and I think everybody needs to know by him or herself how to handle that. Regarding age of onset, regarding genetics, I've already tried to say that there are only very few forms of Parkinson's diseases which are purely genetic. These are transmitted in an autosomal dominant or recessive way, which means really from generation to generation to generation. And you have in general several members with the disease in your family. Having said that, it's not that easy in all cases, because there are some genes which are linked to Parkinson's disease with what we call reduced penetrance. So not everybody who has the gene gets the disease, which is extremely interesting for us, because we would like to know as doctors and scientists, but of course for our patients, why do have some individuals this genetic mutation but do not get a disease? So these individuals, for example, may have some protective factors, some protective genes, which just balance out the problem with the genetic mutation. And then, of course, there is this genetic risk score I already tried to allude to. So meaning that we have so many genes, we have so many possible variations. We all have some variations in our genetic background. And what we really need to have is a good balance between the good and the bad guys. And the problem with the bad guys is that they are sometimes good for something else. So, for example, individuals with Parkinson's disease do not get some other diseases very frequently. For example, several forms of brain tumor hardly ever happen in Parkinson's disease. And when you think about it, it's quite understandable, because Parkinson's disease is a neurodegenerative disorder, which means that neurons degenerate. They just get sick and then they are lost. Brain tumor is a disease where neurons, where cells are growing and growing and growing, then you have the tumor. So it's the opposite what's happening. And so it seems that some diseases don't really match with each other. So fortunately, I have to say, if you have a problem with one disease, you are not prone to get all the other diseases as well. That does not mean that you can have two diseases, of course, and we know that when getting older, you may have some diseases, but this genetic background helps, and there are not the genes which are, or many of the genes are not only bad, they may have some positive influence. That's what I would like to say.
Yeah, thank you. And really interesting, I feel. I wanted to share that we have more than 4,800 video views from people from over 60 countries. So we're really excited about so many people joining us today and asking your questions. Please continue asking your questions. And there is one for Eli. So the question is, there's so many advocates come and go, but really, how do you make sure you move the needle? So what does it take, and is there any secret you can share?
Oh my goodness, it's a great question. First of all, there's a phrase called analysis paralysis, right? When you analyze something so much that you actually don't move forward. So I always encourage people to don't focus on analyzing things to death and just get involved, jump in and learn and engage. I do think it really is an individual journey. I think that people who want to engage and be advocates need to figure out how they want to engage. And like David said, not every group of, just because someone has Parkinson's doesn't mean you're going to connect with that person, right? You may have a shared, common experience of Parkinson's, but maybe you're not really meant to be close to that person. Like, you have to find your group and your network and what it is that makes you feel valued. And there are a lot of opportunities. And online, I mean, I think look to your local organization is my first recommendation. Local meaning your country or your regional organization. And then start looking online. There are a lot of incredibly wonderful and active, engaged groups online, whether it's the PD Avengers, which is a group that is designed by people with Parkinson's, trying to move the needle on a number of things, and they're all socially connected through social media, whether that's Parkinson's Research Group, which is a social media group led by people with Parkinson's who focus on research, because that's something they're really passionate about. I think you have to figure out what it is you want to focus on and network with those groups. And it might take you a while. You might have to try a couple of groups to figure out which one is sort of your tribe, is what I like to call it. So I say just don't hold back. Just start getting involved, engage, and know that it might take you a while to figure out where you want to settle that brings you the most pleasure and joy. But getting involved in any way will help move the needle.
And David, is there anything you would like to share from your perspective? As we already realized, you're a great advocate, actually.
Thank you. I never looked at it that way, but I mean, I can just underscore what Eli is saying. But probably the best place to start, if you're going to a good movement disorder clinic, they are going to have lots of recommendations for what you can do. The movement disorder clinic that I go to, for example, has a counselor on staff who basically can set you up with any of a number of different organizations. And she gives herself freely of her time, to just kind of talk to people as they're going through this. She'll talk to the caregivers, and those are things that are resources right within the clinic that I go to, but they can certainly help you branch out. Very candidly, it's like I'm involved in a lot of different things, but not as much as I perhaps could be because I'm continuing to work. So for me, it's kind of a balance. Right now, I feel like I want to continue to work, and I've been able to work, and my employer has been very understanding. And that's another thing I think is something that people don't talk about too much. I think it's important to disclose if you have something, because a lot of people are nervous about that, but I think it kind of frees you in a strange sort of way, because if you're carrying that around with you and you're trying to hide, it just doesn't help. And it's not like once you disclose, everybody's going to come up to you and say, oh, wow, do you have this? Or, can we talk? It's like, it's not like that at all. What I have found is it's been very rewarding in my workplace, where not only am I still doing my job, and I believe I'm still doing it pretty well, there's people that'll just come up and say, do you mind if can I talk to you about this because I was diagnosed? Or they'll come up and talk to me about something completely different, and it's I think what Eli is getting at is there's a lot of different ways to build a community around this, and it's very helpful.
And maybe, David, if I may just comment on that, I think as a medical doctor, as a neurologist, disclosure is extremely important, because in Parkinson's disease, symptoms get worse when you concentrate on hiding them. So when you really concentrate and when you are stressed, not to shake, not to be rigid, it gets worse. So the best thing to relax is be open. I know it's really difficult for some individuals, it's extremely difficult, but I can only recommend to try to work on that. It gives you so much freedom.
You're making a really good point, because stress is a killer with this thing. So a lot of people say, well, you have a pretty stressful job. It is stressful, but I enjoy it. So I think that mitigates some of the stress. But there's all sorts of studies out there about meditation, for example, which I've always tried to do over the years. Just trying to, it's cornball, but it's living in the present. And that's what you have to emphasize, just moment by moment,
What we all should do, actually, not only those ones living with Parkinson's disease, but I have many patients who said, although I have the disease and although I feel really affected by it, in some aspects I really don't want to miss it, because I've learned so much. I've learned so much about life. I'm now living more in my daily possibilities. I enjoy things more, and as you said, David, it's really each single day, each treasure of the day which I'm enjoying. So it gives life more depth, and this is something we also need to consider.
Now, I'd still rather not have it, but I completely understand what you're saying. So.
Oh, thank you. And actually, these are wonderful closing words already. So I see there's so many questions still in the chat that we are not able to answer now, but we will try to provide an answer to you over the course of the next days via this chat, so it's not lost. And also, I'd like to use the time as we are almost at the end to give everybody a last question, and I request you for a brief answer if you can. But what is the one thing you would like us to remember from today's discussion? So maybe, David, do you want to start?
Well, as somebody who works in human resources and, recruits people to work for the organization that I'm employed with, I think it comes under the broad topic of diversity. Just always remember you have no idea what somebody else might be going through. You don't know what their day has been like. You don't know what their personal life is like. You don't know what type of illnesses or challenges that they may be facing. And I think it forces you to kind of take a step back and just kind of have respect for what other people are dealing with, and I think it goes back to that word that I used earlier. It's like the only way we're going to be able to build some sort of community is just to have that respect for what other people are dealing with. And it's been difficult because COVID, at least in the United States, has been a source of great tension, in the country, and I think if we just try to take a step back and respect people and their differences, we'll be all so much the better.
Thank you, David. And yeah, very, very important words. Eli, what do you want to share with us?
I think it's important for people to remember, if you're diagnosed with Parkinson's, Parkinson's is like an unexpected career. It becomes your career. You're focusing everything you have on this disease, and self-care is a major part of your path forward. And that starts with, and we haven't said it, but David's mentioned it, and Dr. Berg is here, you really need to build your care team. That's not just about your choices of how you live, but making sure you see a trained movement disorder specialist, someone who really understands Parkinson's if you can, and also building out your care team. You are at the heart of your team. You're the chief. You are in charge of it. You make sure you have the right doctor, the right care team. That includes rehabilitation specialists, like David mentioned, speech language pathology, physical therapists. You build out your team. You're in charge of your Parkinson's career, and you need to make the choices to build the best team to work with you.
Thank you, Eli. Yeah, very important, and really builds on what David just said, with sharing and really building on each other and being respectful with each other. And Daniela, do you want to share with us your advice or take-home message for today's session?
Yeah, I would love to, but it's difficult after these two statements. So what I would like to really stress is that although I'm not affected, I'm only a doctor, neurologist, what my patients taught me is that one can live with Parkinson's disease. And one can live with Parkinson's disease. I really have to pronounce that. And it shouldn't be the center of those who are affected. It should be part of life, but the ones who are affected should stay the boss in their life. That's important. That's the one thing. And the other thing is there's so much happening in science. There's so much happened in the last couple of years, and there's so much effort now being put into new therapies, and these are therapies regarding medication, but also new ways of, for example, a high-frequency ultrasound, which is a new form of deep brain stimulation. Then there are all these new therapeutics which address alpha-synuclein, and so on and so on. There's so much happening. So there's always the possibility to look into the future and say, well, it may be even different tomorrow, but today I can live with that.
That are, again, excellent closing words and really inspiring, because what I take home personally is that it's really about living your life to the best you can and know what you value. And then for us as a care team and neighbors, friends, family, to help and support wherever we can to facilitate that choice. So thank you so much. It's really been a great session, very inspiring. And I see from the engagement, from the many questions that were asked, there's a huge interest. So thank you so much for your willingness to share so openly and also to speak up for patients living with Parkinson's disease. Thank you, and have a great rest of the day ahead. And I hope we see each other soon again. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.